Hello and welcome to 21st Century Vitalism, a podcast asking the question, what does it mean to be fully alive in the 21st century? How can we best embody that aliveness while dealing with the unique stressors that we're facing in this strange and potent time? I'm your host, Brett Kane. I'm a licensed massage therapist and mindfulness meditation instructor, and I have an insatiable curiosity for what we can do to increase our vitality. Today's episode is going to be about one of my near and dear topics, psilocybin mushrooms, or for the uninitiated, magic mushrooms, the euponymous and infamous fungi that has been providing amazing experiences for people all across the globe for thousands of years, but has recently gained a lot of traction in the past few years in its therapeutic benefits for treating things as depression and anxiety and end of life anxieties and the such. And joining me today on the show to help investigate this is Jahan Khamsehzadeh, who is a Ph.D. who completed his dissertation in psychedelics at the California Institute of Integral Studies. He's about to be releasing his first book, The Psilocybin Connection, Psychedelics and the Transformation of Consciousness, an Evolution of the Planet, an Integral Approach. And he has been facilitating mushroom ceremonies down in Jamaica at the Atman Retreat Center for quite a few years now. He is a absolute gem of a human being who has really done a lot of beautiful work in compiling all of the years of psychedelic studies into one treatise on how we can best utilize the mushroom to heal. So this conversation has so many elements that I think are very important to this show in terms of how we can engage with the stressful time that we find ourselves in and do some genuine investigative work into the things that really ail us and are keeping us isolated and disconnected from our communities and the planet at large. So a little disclaimer for me, and I do say this in the episode, but mushrooms have played a pretty integral role in my life in terms of helping me see myself in a much more clearer light. There's just so much obscuration that can often happen when we don't have genuine investigative tools at our disposal. So much of our behaviors are on autopilot and conditioned from our past traumas, and it keeps us blind. I mean, it's literally painful to sometimes see some of the things that you've been carrying, which is why our entire organism defends ourselves from these very raw, direct experiences. And for me, the mushroom has always provided a space where I am very skillfully led into a more open and direct relationship with my subconscious. So what started off as something that was really recreational and fun and like, oh, wow, yeah, this is such a novel experience, really quickly became something that became the spear point for all of my self-growth. And I'm currently at a place where I don't necessarily use the medicine as often, but I have to give credit where credit is due. And I genuinely don't think I'd be where I'm at today had it not been for the real therapeutic work that I've done with this fungal friend. So this episode, we talk a lot about the idea of disconnect. We talk a lot about how this has always been used in our society or in our culture, in our past, to connect us to our communities and to remember our place upon the earth as terrestrial beings who are here to live in communion with the natural elements rather than above it. And this really is a beautiful conversation. Jahan is so knowledgeable about this, and I'm really glad that out of all of the folks that I could have reached out to walk us through this, it was him. Plus, he has a fondness for the band Tool, which I also do. So we do talk about the festival space a little bit as well. I'm pretty sure he was part of the Burning Man culture, and he has a lot of insights from the counterculture to the scientists who are actually studying it in a very real and grounded way. Plus, he's also trained with the Mazatec people, who are the original peoples in Latin America who were holding this torch for thousands of years. So really, he has plugged into just about every culture and community that has worked with this, and he is the dude. If there ever were to be a dude, he'd be the dude. So without further ado, I just wanted to open the floor up. This is a really juicy conversation. Honestly, if you wanted to get a notebook and just jot some stuff down, we also talk about how to set up your own intentional space, how to integrate things. It's a very meat and potatoes kind of conversation with a lot of philosophical underpinnings, but it's really, this episode is about how to work with the mushroom in a very real and responsible way. We're all about responsibility here at the show. So that's what we're doing today, y'all. I hope you're as excited as I was to record it, because I was really, really pumped for this, and I'm really pumped to release it. So thank you so much for joining us. As always, if you want to support the show, head on over to Apple Podcasts, leave us a 5-star review, subscribe to the YouTube, like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, interact with all the socials. All that stuff is podcast gold, and I definitely rely on it at this current stage of the show. I wouldn't say it unless it mattered. If you want to follow Jahan's platform, head on over to psychedelicevolution.org. He's got a lot of really great videos of his prior talks. His new book is going to be coming out very soon. The link is also on his website and down below in the description on our website. Again, that book is going to be called The Psilocybin Connection, Psychedelics, the Transformation of Consciousness and Evolution of the Planet, an Integral Approach. So please sit back, drink some tea, do some stretches, and welcome Jahan to the show. All right, we are now live. Jahan, hello. Welcome to the show.
Hello.
How are you today?
Doing really good today. It's nice to be sharing this time with you, Brett. Thank you.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this. As soon as I heard about your platform through the Future Fossils discussion group, I don't remember what exactly you posted, but I was like, oh no, this is such an important thread in the tapestry of cultivating vitality in this day and age. So for the folks who have not heard of you before or are unfamiliar with your work, you are just wrapping up the final stages of, is this your first book?
Correct.
And it is The Psilocybin Connection, Psychedelics and the Transformation of Consciousness. Now, for the people who know me on a personal level, they know that this is something that has deeply affected me in my life. For the folks who only know me through the podcast, they're about to know that. So as someone who is birthing this book at such a right time in our current socio-political situation, I just want to kind of dial it back a little bit and kind of ask you, how did you get started in this work?
No, thanks. Great question. When I was 18, I had a psychedelic experience that radically transformed my life. I'm 37 right now. During that experience, it felt like my whole world turned inside out. Over the course of an evening seeing Tool, my favorite band. Somebody gave me mushrooms on the way to the show. And I had this experience of feeling eternal, of feeling God, of having this big unitive experience. And I was an atheist at the time, suicidal, depressed. And it broke me through into a new kind of worldview where there's deep interest in spirituality, synchronicity. My life had a sense of meaning. The experience told me love and then learning are the most two important things in life. And so it radically changed me. And I thought about that experience every day for the next 7 years, like really consumed by like, how could something so huge exist and then people not be talking about it? I was about to start my first semester of community college 2 months later. And I went as a neuroscience major. I wanted to study the link between consciousness and the brain. I wanted to eventually do research in psychedelics. This is 2002. There wasn't much research being done at the time. And without any kind of entrance into that area, after that semester, I ended up coming across a physics professor that said, if you really want to understand the universe, you have to know physics. And so I went into physics and mathematics as my major for the next 3 years, thinking that mathematics could explain consciousness. That was, just it's one layer, right? But it's not like the whole depth of it. Mm-hmm. Something like psychedelics can give you this direct experience of oneness. A few years in, I took more mushrooms, and it said to leave physics and to study mysticism directly. And I was like, this isn't a major. This is not something I can study in school. And there's no profession. You're not going to get paid for this. So there's a lot of fear around it. But I ended up switching my major again. I ended up majoring in philosophy, which is kind of the closest I felt I can get to it. Minoring in physics, psychology, one class away from mathematics. I decided then to continue my research into consciousness. I moved to the Bay Area, got my master's in Consciousness and Transformative Studies. During that time, I really also got into psychotherapy. And eventually went to the California Institute of Integral Studies. Got my doctorates in philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness, which really kind of encompassed everything that I was interested in. Philosophy being the history of ideas, cosmology, the structure of the universe, and consciousness, more direct experience in how it evolves. During this time, psychedelics, I knew had been playing the most transformative roles of my life. They were giving deeper, say, wisdom and information and changes more than therapy had, more than relationships had, more than community had, more than meditation had. I gave myself completely over to all those areas. But I just knew that the most pivotal shifts came from those direct experiences. And as I became more and more clear about how I could be of purpose in the world, it was by moving personally my dissertation to focus directly on that research. About 5-6 years ago, I decided to do psychedelics and got more specific on psilocybin mushrooms. I had another mushroom experience and it said, go get trained in this. And so I did. I found some trainings. I ended up training with Francois Borzat, going to Mexico with her, training within the Mazatec tradition. She wrote recently the book Consciousness Medicine. And I did a multi-year training there while also getting trained specifically working with mushrooms. I got trained in Hakomi with somatic psychotherapy practice, learning other skill sets. I assisted for 2 years at the psychedelic certificate training at CIIS. I assisted for a year in the guide training at the Center for Consciousness Medicine. Eventually started doing guide work in Jamaica with Atman Retreats. And so it's pretty much encompassed my whole life, with 5 years of research for writing the book, which, as the publisher states on the Amazon page, is definitely the largest synthesis of information on psilocybin. I read every material I could come across during that time to try to make a really comprehensive framework. So it's changed me inside and out, and I definitely think it's the medicine that we need the most right now on this planet.
Yeah, I see that you have a picture of Terence Mckenna in your background, and I love it. And I mean, he was really a big proponent of, it really is one of the most radically shifting things that we can do in this current paradigm. And it's amazing that you also had Tool as a part of your transformational experience. I absolutely love them. I was just listening last night. I'm just kind of curious, do you think that you maybe had a predisposition to be having this experience of unity, which, I mean, I feel like atheism is it's kind of one side of the spectrum, but it's belief and then atheism, but it's still on the spectrum, whereas I feel like agnostic is a little above it. Do you think that you were beforehand kind of just wired to be looking for something? And is it possible that somebody could have a psilocybin experience without that unitive response to it?
Yeah, no, I love the question, and I'm surprised I haven't been asked that more. I do believe I have a predisposition, and it's whether it's genetic, temperamental, or so on. It's hard to say. I got my interest in psychology led me to research a whole bunch of different personality systems, like the Myers-Briggs, the Enneagrams, astrology in terms of natal charts. And I'm a 4 on the Enneagram, so there's a pull towards death. I'm an INFP. There's a pull towards oneness. My whole natal chart is geared towards kind of transcendental experiences. And there's the flip side where that came in younger life with a lot of pain. At age 5, I was kind of obsessed around this whole idea of God. What is this idea of this being that kind of sees and controls everything? And that pushed me to lead structural religion really early, around the age of 12. I was like, nobody knows what's going on. And so I became obsessed with these larger questions. And to the point where by the age of 15, I had just so much existential anxiety, of nobody knows what's happening. What's the point of my life? A lot of despair. So a lot of people just got to coast through those years. I became obsessed. And because of all the years and hours leading up, by the time I took mushrooms at 18, it was really ripe for that whole thing to fall apart. And then I still gave myself over to 20 more years of kind of philosophy, which I feel kind of done with in many ways. But there has been, I feel, some predisposition to that kind of thinking.
Yeah.
And to answer your question more fully, having seen, a few hundred psychedelic experiences of other people, it doesn't always go to that degree of unity. I think from my perspective, it's the most healing experience that we can have. It helps our sense of belonging, of a wholeness, of purpose. It does a lot. But a lot of times people can take a lot of mushrooms and just have personal healing on a biographical level. Some people, there's a very small percentage of people, maybe 3 to 5, you can give them a lot of mushrooms and nothing happens. You know, so it's not this case where it's effective for everybody. But it does, you know, the wording they use in the experiments, it does occasion mystical experiences. That means it gives a possibility for them to occasionally arise.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, my experience with the mushroom has always been one of feeling like it's imbibing with something, like there's this sense of like externality coming in and kind of like taking the driver's wheel, which I think is something that a lot of people here in the West kind of have a problem doing, where we're very control oriented, very individuality focused. And I think that disconnection is probably part and parcel with what was making you so existentially angst when you were younger. Was you knew deep down that there was this deeper connection, but you weren't able to feel it until the mushroom actually got rid of the blockages. I don't want to like speak for your experience, but that's kind of what it was like for me. You know, I've kind of been more agnostic and pushed against things. And it was really by interacting with specifically this substance among a few other ones that it was like, oh, there's a level of connection within my organism that is like to the magnetism of the ground. And it just sometimes needs that, like that merging, you know?
Yeah, no, well said. You know, what you said correlates very well with the neuroscience. Well, we have found it dissolves what's known as a default mode network. So this network lights up in the brain every time you think of me, I of the self. And it's overdeveloped with people with anxiety and depression. So if you're in pain, you're constantly self-focused and self-absorbed. And that network gets stronger and stronger. What they have found is that network also works as a repressive faculty for the rest of your being. So in psilocybin states, and we've only known since 2016 with MRI studies, so it quiets the default mode networks, which allows the whole brain to reintegrate. The whole system begins to light up, to rewire. Many of those structures actually stabilize, you know, and even to go further, it also stimulates neurogenesis, the growth of new neurons. The brain physically begins to grow. And the parts of your brains that atrophy, it's the dendrites can atrophy, the parts that connect the neurons. So it's called spinogenesis. Those dendrites can come back to life. So the sense of deadness and isolation you feel in depression is actually parts of your brain actually no longer communicating. And the whole brain starts to move into a unitive state, hyperconnects. Wow. I think correlates to these experiences of unity we have with ourselves, the environment, other people, the universe.
That is fascinating. That idea of like connection first starts by feeling connected and whole within yourself before you're able to connect and become whole with the environment that you're in. And it's so easy for trauma to separate parts of us from ourselves. And I think one of the really traumatizing things that's baked into our culture is the meme of individuality and all for themselves. It's like we are born into a world that we didn't necessarily choose. And then by a very young age, we're told like, you better prepare because you're going to be on your own. And like that just sends this entire like physiological messaging. And it just sets us up right from the beginning to just have kind of traumatized separate lives, you know? So I think we see a lot of that. So much pain. I could say so much pain comes from this experience of self. I mean, just to break it down, it's like we're alive because we're individuals. So we have an individuality and sense of self. And yet the self is also the source of all our pain. So one way to see it is we're a whole, but we're also parts of a larger whole. And we can't lose that second part. So if we just see ourselves simply as individuals that have to survive on our own, we're filled with a lot of fear. Because in truth, it's like we're in this web of life, this large network. We depend on plants for oxygen, for food. We depend on other animals. We emotionally depend on other humans. And to say we can do this on our own is this fragmented view that one isn't real. So we need to move overall from independence to interdependence, which needs a lot of vulnerability and trust and so on. But if we're left without that, we're kind of stuck in anxiety the whole time of thinking it's up to me to survive completely. Yeah. I'm really seeing right now, I mean, a big part of this show is kind of addressing the fact that we're in a very precarious time in the 21st century with a lot of uncertainty, with climate collapse, with the crazy political structure that we have that we're all becoming very clear and lucid on. And I think one of the key elements that I really want to thrust forward in the show is community is the way forward, but so many people have such a misappropriated sense of what community is, because their sense of community is also oftentimes built on like the bed of traumatized relationships. So I'm kind of curious where ceremony comes in, because ceremony, from my understanding, is a communal act. And I think right now we are gravely lacking in having a secular ceremony. I don't know if that's even like a thing, because there's usually a mystical bent. But as somebody who is often in music festival scenes, I see that as the youth's way of like having a ceremony. You have this 4-day excursion into a field where you're not taking the best care of yourself, to be honest, but you end up having these really, really heightened liminal experiences, but there's no integration. But there's nowhere else to have that kind of experience for a lot of people who are starved it in their day-to-day. So where do you think ceremony comes in with this work of reconnecting to ourselves and with our communities?
You know, there's so many ways, you know, to define that word itself. Is it, you know, like you more of a traditional setting, you know, like a lot of these have indigenous traditions with lineages going back in a long time, and they have their own structure. And yet some of those myths and beliefs may not apply to people from our culture. And our culture has a lot to offer, like Western psychotherapy does a lot specifically working with trauma. You know, a lot of these other cultures, they kind of see trauma as these negative spirits that are stuck in your body. You know, we know now that a lot of it's also based on your past experiences. There's a lot to heal. So our culture has a lot to give. But some of my favorite containers by far has been the festivals. You know, the level of recreation, you know, like recreational, but recreation kind of space where it's more light and it's more fun and it's social and it's playful, for me gives a lot of the set and setting to have optimal experiences. I've also volunteered a lot of times with the Zendo, like the MAPS project, where we go to like Burning Man and so on, and we set a stage so that they're safe places that are for people having hard psychedelic experiences. So I think the festival scene needs that. And there's so many ways to make these experiences intentional. You know, if people are doing one-on-one ceremonies with like a psychotherapist, there's always prep sessions leading up, getting to know the person deeply, setting the stage, building and trust. Then you have the full ceremony. Then normally you have about 2 weeks of integration, and one session and then the session that follows. If you come with us to Jamaica, we have, you know, intake calls, then we have a whole prep day, then we have the ceremony, then 2 integration days. So there's a lot of space for you to arrive into relationships with these plans and these states of consciousness very correctly, organically, with a lot of space and trust, then a lot of place to digest them. But aside from that, because the festival scene, it does also provide this freedom, this safety, because we're not being persecuted there. You know, there's the music. There's so many ways to experience these states, you know. So I guess we'd have to isolate more, like, are we talking about ceremony more like religious, psychotherapeutic, one-on-one, or in this larger festival setting where we're in a very large playground and we're learning new ways to play?
Yeah. Is there a difference between the psycho-spiritual and the religious? Do you think that there's a distinction to be made in the way that those are structured?
Great question. I think eventually it all leads to the same place.
Okay.
Within ourselves, like if we become unified and whole, there's also, I think the main psychedelic impulse is towards unity, whether with ourselves, the ecosystem, the planet, the cosmos, and so on. And there's so many layers to that unity. We're all wholes within larger wholes. And so me becoming whole within myself means moving through all my trauma work, through my relationships with each other, discovering my life purpose, and so on. What's my role within this larger whole? You know, again, a lot of these traditions, though, that created ceremonies, they didn't have the Western intellect that really broke things down, especially when it comes to psychotherapy. You know, all the structures of the psyche. They didn't have the language and so on. So for them, it was all spirits. You know, they have a very animistic belief that every part of you is almost like a different spirit, and spirits makes up the entire environment. And yeah, there's some truth to that, but they don't necessarily have these constructs of the ego or the collective unconscious and so on, or the neuroscience of talking like the default mode network. So I think it all does lead to the same place, but psychology works on mostly the layers of the biography. And unless you study transpersonal psychology, it doesn't go to these larger realm of like archetypes and larger unit of experiences.
Do you think that like the more animistic approach of more primal cultures, do you think that that was actually the peak of what they potentially needed? Because they didn't have like the psychological terms and definitions. So to them, that like wasn't even a part of it. So like, is it possible that just having the spirits was actually all they needed in order to shake it out and process that trauma?
Yeah, they did fine. I think they did just fine. Our system generally is geared towards healing. So if your body gets a cut, it heals on its own. You're not sitting there have to process how your arm's going to heal. It does so. Your organs, your body, everything wants to repair and maintain its integrity. Your heart and your psyche wants to do the same thing. But if it's emotional and psychological, normally giving a loving space so the person feels safe and they can process the material, their system moves towards healing. As Stanislav Grof, who studied psychotropic states, with LSD and other psychedelics for 50 years, he says that the psychedelic states catalyze what's known as states that are holotropic, states that move towards wholeness. So just getting into the states moves our psyche towards wholeness. That's why when people give mushrooms, a lot of it tends to self-organize on its own.
Wow.
And that's yeah.
I love that idea that there's already like a map within us towards wholeness, but it just kind of takes like kind of moving some things around. It's almost like I think it's called like bone setting, where you have to kind of like break the bone in order for it to like actually heal in a different way. And I can attest to the experience. Sometimes it feels like that. You're just like in it. You're like, I feel kind of awful. It's very challenging sometimes, but if you are in that space, which I also can attest to, like the transformational setting, is that playfulness that you brought up, I feel like is so important, because I think underlying the entire experience of being alive is a slight nod towards playfulness and levity. And we often kind of forget that when we're fragmented within ourselves and engaging in this capitalistic society, that like we are fundamentally here out of a basically good reason,
No. Capitalism in general, I wrote a lot on it too, because by its nature, it focuses on capital, and it's focused on the individual gaining capital, right, at the expense of the other employees, the society, the ecosystem. Most of the problems we have now in the world is these stresses called because people are trying to gain profit or money. So by its entire structure, especially within the way it's created right now, money's created out of debt. There's 3 times more debt than there is money in the world. All that creates tremendous stress and sense of scarcity out of something we've created, right? So the rest of the animal kingdom is not in this constant stress all day, every day of I have to pay rent, I have to figure out how to pay food, I have to figure out how to provide my family, where they're working 8 hours a day, at least for survival. And some people it's not even meeting that need. So we're now in a society where it's difficult. As Yuval Noah Harari points out in his book Sapiens, our hunter-gatherer ancestors were likely a lot less stressful than any of the major of the population today. They spent about 4 hours a day for working on survival, and the rest of the time was just communicating, gossiping, playing. Primates today spend about 25% of their time just grooming each other and socializing, right? So we're in constant survival mode, focusing on individuality to survive, which is it's larger than any other point in human history.
Yeah. I definitely feel like, especially with like social media, where you see other individuals who are like really succeeding, it puts that extra pressure on to like, oh man, they're really having it. Like they have the life that I want. I have to, so I feel like it's really getting compounded. So what I'm curious about is for people who want to like begin this work, but maybe don't have access to head on out to Jamaica, who I'm not saying do anything illegal, but for the people who they're going to, how could they actually set an intention? So say they're entering like a festival space, or they're like, I'm at home, I have the ability to procure. How could they like take their experience and create this container of levity so that they're not just like sailing off into stormy waters without any sort of oar?
Yeah, so it's definitely been an issue I've been thinking about a lot. We're almost finished creating this training with a company called Psilo Health. Psilo Health, and I think its website's psilohealth.ca. The training should be up in about a month, and it's a 4-hour training how to teach people how to sit for each other. So it should be a very comprehensive overview made of 8 or 9 modules, about 4 hours long, to give you from beginning to end, either how to sit with yourself or sit with each other. And an issue is that there's such a high demand for professionals. That's the bottleneck. There's so many poor people that need mental health, need, experienced facilitators or that want to experience things themselves, that there are people being trained. And so we need to at least give enough awareness or knowledge for people in a lot of these communities to begin to help each other. So that material will be out. It's mostly recorded and just needs some editing in about a month. In my book, I spent about 20 pages going through an overview about guides and psychotherapy and so on, just how to give some information. If I wanted somebody who was going to try next week, I would definitely do some research. So these substances, specifically, I'll focus on mushrooms, but a lot of the psychedelics, they've been studied very, very well. Biologically, psilocybin is really safe. You could take 1,000 doses, your body breaks it down. It fits into the 5-HT2A serotonin receptor with no biological toxicity. You're fine. That doesn't mean, though, a lot of fear is not going to come up. That doesn't mean trauma is not possible. That doesn't mean you're going to get to this point where you might think you're dying and believe it's true. So having somebody there that's also familiar with this territory and help you feel safe can be tremendously helpful. So I definitely recommend people finding a skilled professional. Otherwise, having somebody they deeply trust, start with lower doses. There is no need to rush the process. I think a good way to see this, it's a lifelong relationship with the mushrooms. You could take it every few months, 3 or 4 times a year, whatever you need. But it helps you to keep growing. So start slow, do your research, create the right setting, and begin to see it like as an upward slope towards growth in your life.
Yeah, I like that. I like, again, you pointed towards, hey, community. That's how you set a good space. So what can they do so the day arrives? They got their friend, they are setting up their space, they're putting up their trippy posters, they got some Netflix stuff, or like, how do you set a container that will actually facilitate a healthy, safe, secure, productive session that isn't just kind of like spacing out?
Totally. No. So the prep work's important to get clear why you're taking on this. Is there psychological things you want to focus on? What do you want from this experience? And get very, this is a big and important thing that I think requires a lot of respect, and it'll kick your ass if you don't respect it. It can make you grovel and humble you really deeply, right? So come into it very humbly. Again, set up the whole thing with some help around you. As far as for the environment, I would have a playlist, about 6 hours. Hopefully not too many words so it doesn't pull your focus. And I'd actually recommend an eye mask to go internal. So the external world can seem absolutely fascinating. Objects appear more 3D. There's more depth perception, more colors, more vivid. Seeing sacred geometry is pretty common, leading in the appearance of other animals. But if you go internally, there's a larger, richer world with more meaning than the external world. So I would not have the movie that pulls your attention to anything especially superficial, the posters. It's about going internal to see, and it depends what paradigm you have, whether you want to say spirit, consciousness, God, or just your own unconscious, whatever paradigm you're using. There seems to be a deep sense of meaning that can arise if you pay attention inside.
Yeah, I've always kind of considered like the visual and auditory aspect of it as side effects. Like that's just the side effects that'll pass, but like the actual work of processing and dredging up the emotions going in is actually where like the pedal meets the metal. And I find that I find it just more distracting, which is why for me, I don't participate at music festivals. I'm pretty much sober at this point just to like make sure that my vibe is steady and stable for other people who I notice are going through it. But with that kind of context, if people are trying to do like real genuine work and form a real relationship, do you think that festivals are potentially more distracting?
Yeah. I would say it's different for the individual and at that point in life of what's going on. There's such a big, there could be quite a contrast to the psychedelic community for people that want recreational spaces, and the other people are like, no, this is really serious. It has to be taken kind of in a ceremonial setting. Some of my biggest, most important life experiences have happened in a festival or concert setting. They have, even though I've done a lot of work in ceremony. And so I wouldn't want to take that away from people. That being said, the substance itself also matters. I don't really take mushrooms themselves socially too much, and I don't take them too much in a kind of concert setting because it can be very emotional and really hard and so on. Other medicines, whether it's MDMA, LSD, even 2CB, there's a lot of variety of things that can be more easier to navigate in that setting. That being said, it's still so dose dependent. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's about right. So what happens if somebody finds themselves up shit creek and they don't have their ore and things are getting really challenging, even if they have somebody, but like they're not even recognizing that somebody's there. I mean, I guess for those people, I mean, I guess whatever we're about to say is probably not going to be relevant once they're in that position. But as somebody who facilitates ceremony, I'm sure you have helped people through really challenging situations. So like, what is the best approach when things get out of hand?
Yeah, no, well said. For those doing it on their own, I believe it's called Fireside Chat. It just went live, I think in April or May. And so now there's a 24/7 app that helps people with difficult psychedelic experiences. There's somebody live on the other line that's there that you could text with to help you through those moments. And I believe even calling. And it's done by volunteer work. And so that's across at least this country that's available 24-hour support on difficult psychedelic experiences. So I'll have that handy. I run a free psychedelic integration group at the SF Psychedelic Society called Developing a Relationship with Sacred Mushrooms. It's monthly. It's the first Thursday of every month. You can come and build community. You know, it's about 50-ish people that show up each time to build community, connect with each other, integrate your experience, be seen, connect with others, get tips and tricks and so on. So that's some space there. As far as the actual session itself, you know, again, I recommend lower doses just because a lot can come up with higher. And one of the reasons I love psilocybin so much is it's different every time. Other substances, MDMA and so on, are pretty reliably producing the same effects. Psilocybin, because it really meets you where you're at and gives you something new, the potential for growth is almost infinite. That being said, what can come up can almost always be a surprise. Deep grief, deep anger, explosions of excitement and energy. I mean, I've had to restrain people and hold them down for a long time. It can get really, because it can be a hurt to themselves, to other people. I've held people their depths of anger and despair and suicidal ideation. A lot of the people, though, that come to this kind of ceremony work, 80% it's because they're in pain. They have some deep pain that traditional therapy and medications haven't been able to resolve after years of trying. You know, as the studies have shown, 80% of people with treatment-resistant depression show really positive signs and effects with psilocybin treatment. So they've already tried everything. They've been in a lot of pain, and then they're coming. So I've been working with high traumatized individuals. That being said, it's hard for you to know what's going to happen inside, including another very one that's not talked enough about is lots of expressions of sexuality. You know, a lot of vitalism, but because it's such a big part of a wholeness, it can be repressed. All of a sudden, people can feel really deeply sexual. And so you want to know that within yourself and while holding space with the really strong boundaries, the range of experiences that are possible. And a lot of it's easier to mitigate if the doses are small. There's some level of control that is possible. And then again, having some level of supervision is really good.
So you think kind of creating like a stratified relationship with it where like you start small, you start to kind of build a relationship before you start climbing the ladder, so to speak? Or do you think capping it? Because I know the gentleman behind you would say that 5 dried grams in silent darkness was the way to go, but that's a pretty heavy dose.
Yeah, I mean, that's close to the dose I started out a lot of people with, but we have a really strong therapeutic structure. You know, we generally start with about 4-ish grams, but there's so much work done in the container, and it's very skilled individuals, and we can really hold what's happening. And we have a lot of padding and space, literally and metaphorically for them. I love Terence a lot. McKenna, I've listened to maybe a couple hundred hours of him talking, and he's deeply influenced my life, my dissertation, and so on. And as much as I've gotten to see, he's also, by temperament, not say a little less relational, but one of the reasons he said he took the silent darkness by himself when taking these 5 dried grams is because if there's people around him, he got really consumed with what's going on to them, didn't want to be a bother to them, and so on. So he got in his ways of the psyche. And so it's different if you start building a therapeutic container with somebody, and then they actually help you feel more safe and more calm and so on. And by the time Terence said that, he already had a few decades of experience under him, right? And so he could take 5 grams alone and know his limits. Somebody never doing this before, doing 5 grams in silent darkness, it could potentially be horrific, and it doesn't need to start at the heavy of a acceleration of a pace for growth. You know, wait a year. I mean, just start with 1 to 2 grams, see how that goes, build to 3, build to 4, build to 5. And at some moment you'll hit your limit. You're like, I'm being stretched a lot. I don't need more than this.
Yeah. So let's go back to our imaginal person who just had this difficult experience and is now over the hump, and they're like, I'm back. Okay, I'm in my body. I'm kind of coming down a little bit. For the next few weeks, what are some ways that they can actually integrate and weave that into their daily life? Because I am a big proponent. I'm a body worker, so I studied Peter Levine's work with trauma. And one of the big things is oftentimes what happens with trauma work is you dredge up these traumas and it re-traumatizes people. So if somebody goes into this experience and then I'm being met with something that I haven't processed, and then they just like re-traumatize, like how do we ground that experience in a way that actually heals?
Yeah. Kind of to bring back what you said earlier, so much of our cultures feel splintered and focused on individuality. So much of the healing is in connection. I took this training, Hakomi, which is somatic psychotherapy training, and is so well put together. And something the instructor said that really stood out, John Eisenstein, and he said trauma is generally a part of us that feels alone. Something happened horrific and we felt really alone in the process, and we're still stuck in this fragmented state of the fear of aloneness. As opposed to something hard happened, but we felt deep in connection, then it's just a hard experience that we move through. So with the therapist, normally we bring out these parts of us that were splintered. Say you were raped, you felt really alone in the process. There's this aggressor, but I'm still alone in shock and fear. Having that process with another individual to feel safe, it helps it move forward. So deeply, again, that container setting between the guide or the therapist and the actual experiencer, or maybe a best friend, somebody close, can be deeply, deeply healing. After the experience, same thing, it could be fragmenting to feel alone. When I had my mushroom experience of 18, I was in Tucson, Arizona with almost no community around this. It was so profound. And I learned very quickly in that culture, 2002, that it actually didn't feel safe for me to talk about my experience. Nobody else around had this experience of something, say God, divine, spiritual. It wasn't part of the cultural conversation. And so understandably, if I did it, you'd be seen as crazy or what you think you're special. So now it's just like, I see it all the time. I see people have these experiences all the time. It's a part of our dialogue. At the time, I didn't even know there's, research happening with mystical experiences and psychedelics. It wasn't necessarily in the news. And so having connection around it, but the right kind of connection is very, very helpful. A lot of the trauma releasing is in the body. So it's also very common for during the experience and sometimes afterwards to have a lot of shaking. The same way, like if an animal is being chased, by say, like a predator, it gathers all this adrenaline in its body and then it shakes it off. So it can go back to relaxation. Our body's trying to do the same thing. So it's common people with a lot of trauma go through a lot of shaking, a lot of crying, a lot of sweating and throwing up. There's a lot of expulsion of energy during the actual experience. That may continue. And then learning to put words to it. People might really be drained. They're normally really tired after psychedelic experiences. But I think it's an important part of the process to turn the experience into some level of cognition as part of the integration process. So, there's ways to dance, get in your body, exercise, and so on. But I think journaling is really good. If it's not that night or a few days later, you don't have to force it. But it really helps your mind to try to understand. Otherwise, it's kind of left all over the place, trying to categorize what just happened because it's so outside of the bounds of our normal reality.
I'm really glad that you brought up the purging. That's something that that's why I don't want to do it in a public setting, because I honestly consider an experience with psilocybin. If I don't puke, then I feel like it's not complete. What role is the purging playing in this process? Is it kind of processing and releasing emotions, or is there something, physically your body is just like, I don't want none of this in me. But in terms of a ceremony space, is there kind of a framework for understanding that mechanism?
I think it serves many functions. For one, to take the experience seriously. I don't find generally taking mushrooms fun. I take it because it's good medicine, right? It's does a lot for people, including myself. And so there's this kind of hurdle to jump through as the mushroom's coming on. It can be kind of anxiety provoking, really difficult. Your consciousness shifting form. You're moving into a kind of new space. Generally, when we encounter something unknown, the response is anxiety. So normally people come in with a lot of anxiety, even though I know it or they've done it before, everything's going to be okay. Regardless how many times I've taken mushroom over the last 20 years, a lot, I still get anxious every time.
Yeah.
Because you're about to confront something that feels so real and your body goes through these responses with anxiety and so on. I'd say 1 out of every 20 times somebody needs to fully throw up, but 1 out of every 5 to 10 times people get nauseous, where they think they're going to throw up, but they're not. And I've seen it, if you really kind of track what's happening in that moment, I've seen people, like something comes up for them, like, oh my God, I can't say this. There's some truth they have, but they can't say it. They can't say it. And all of a sudden they vomit. They feel okay, they can say it. Or they have some emotional block and then they vomit. Now all of a sudden they're kind of free. So it seems to be like, how much are we holding on in our system? I love that saying, the truth will set you free. I think it's with these knots inside of us that once we let them go, we can kind of free like energy enough to move more towards personal honesty, with one and each other.
Wow. Yeah. I don't know what that says about me if I'm puking every time.
I mean, some of it's inherited, right? Like some of it's intergenerational, some of it's whatever it is. If there's blocks in the system, it needs to come out. But again, the nauseousness is pretty normal. The other part, I would recommend not eating the day of. If you have to eat 4 hours before, it's going to reduce the nauseousness and the need to be throwing up.
What about like hydration? Is there kind of a proper? I recently just kept puking from working out, and I found out I was hydrating too much. So,
interesting. Yeah.
So, is there kind of a general guideline for where your water should be at?
No, drink when you're thirsty. That being said, you don't want to interrupt the experience too much of having to go to the bathroom. So I'd also would recommend no stimulants that day, coffee, tea, because it's already stimulating your nervous system. You're gonna be up. It's hard definitely to fall asleep on mushrooms. It can be hard to walk. You want to stay in your process. So I wouldn't. If you need to go to the bathroom, go to the bathroom. But optimally, you're not drinking so much where you have to go more than once during that 4 or 5 hours.
Got you. Okay. So something that I've recently been doing is I took a meditation training this past year. So it's mindfulness meditation in the Kagyu Buddhist lineage. So I've been doing this about every day. And for me, this has been one of probably the most life-changing things I've done next to my explorations in psychedelics. And I can't imagine having not done it. For me, it feels like the forefront of my development. And I'm kind of curious if you see a link, like would a meditation practice help you be able to interact with this space in a more healthy way? Or, what's the relationship there?
A lot. I've had a lot of psychedelic experiences, notably also mushrooms, LSD, encouraging me to develop and keep strong in meditation practice, right? So I think they go together very well. One definitely said at least 20 minutes a day to help you stay in a state of flow and following your intuition, to be kind of clear enough to feel kind of guided around with daily life. And I've gone through many seasons of meditation. During one particular one, I started off with 1 hour a day, then 2 hour days, and 3 hours a day. And after over 100 days of this, I had that huge kind of state shift experience where I'm like, you're in it, and all of a sudden you feel you're about to die and dissolve. It's so scary. You stay with it, and all of a sudden there's this huge kind of sense of God and divinity, and everything's vibrating. I'm alive. You're completely in the moment. You're huge, radical, straight restructuring. I'm like, wow, like I'm here. Wow, this is awesome. And the first thought that arose was, I've experienced this on psilocybin. But this just took me hundreds of hours.
Yeah.
Meditation has a lot of discipline, practices, clearing. It does a lot of things, but as far as getting into states and experiencing the awareness and knowledge, it just seems to really shortcut the process to get you. And maybe my previous psychedelic experiences had made my psyche more malleable and easier to break through, because what took me 100 days might have taken somebody else maybe a lot longer, but it happened because I really stayed with it, and I already had tasted these states before. And for me, they was completely identical from what I'd experienced on psilocybin.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, because I know Terence Mckenna was famous about just like, why meditate? Just follow plants instead. There's this really wonderful conversation with him and Ram Dass, who is someone I've plugged in with probably a little bit more than McKenna. I love McKenna to death. I mean, no pun intended. But I just, there's something for me that I'm noticing with meditation. I feel like growth is kind of like an axis. So there's horizontal growth and then vertical growth. So I feel like for me, my relationship, like the mushrooms have been really horizontal in that it helps me uncover my psychological situation more than it does necessarily my spiritual. It kind of moves things around to access the spiritual. But the meditation for me has been about learning how to be radically okay with where I'm at and the horizontal progression, and like not feel the same, like I gotta do it So baked within the experience of meditation, the patience, the fact that it takes 100 days to actually even feel even like the slightest thing has almost trained me to just find like radical peace with wherever I'm at in the stage. But then the mushrooms dredge up all these like karmic conditions that I have within myself that like I then have to like metabolize and use the meditation to become okay with. And for me, my progress has just been one of kind of acquiescing to just who I am right now, you know? And I just wonder, is there a chance that we could maybe use mushrooms in a materialist way to where we get hooked to the experience of like, I need ceremony to do this thing. I gotta heal, you know, we become addicted to healing. Is that possible? Have you seen that?
Yeah. I haven't, specifically with mushrooms. You know, they're used to break addictions. You know, there's been a lot of research on with alcohol and nicotine. They break our patterns of addiction and forming habits. Generally, after people do a large mushroom journey, like they're good. They had a lot of meaningful stuff, and like I'm good for a while.
Yeah.
Also, within nature, it seems to be very anti-addictive in the sense that you can't really take mushrooms too many days in a row with high doses and have an experience. Like if you have a ceremony one day, you need almost double the second day, almost quadruple the third. By day 4 or 5, you can take whatever amount and it stops working. So it kind of has a built-in mechanism of not getting hooked. But to kind of bring it back to the meditation, I definitely see meditation for myself. It's a daily practice, cultivating a state of consciousness. Mushrooms, you know, it's good quarterly, you know, every 4 months. And I think that really can deepen our sense of states. It does kind of this checkup, where am I with all the parts of my being and so on. You know, generally, unless you're microdosing, psychedelics aren't seen as a daily practice. It's like once in a while you do a deep dive. That being said, you know, meditation is great for the daily. Like, you know, once in a while people run a marathon that they work up to, but they still can go to the gym 5 days a week, you know? So I think we can have structures that are good for our daily lives. And I think that's what meditation is amazing for. And then once in a while we need a deeper dive.
Right. Do you think an element of that deeper dive is kind of like the mystical experience of it? Because I wouldn't say that my meditation is inherently mystical. It's more like I'm sitting there kind of bored and just kind of like seeing all my neurotic patterns like, yep, I'm okay. Like, here we are, back to the breath. But like with mushrooms,
I love it.
It's like a very much like, oh, now my boundary is dissolving and I'm becoming one with the cosmos. And do you think that humans need mystical experience in order to be kind of fully vital, fully connected to their being?
Yeah. I want to say yes. That being said, having worked with a lot of people, it's not necessarily available to everybody and all the time. It's not like I take it every time I take mushrooms, I have a mystical experience. I've just happened to have, I don't know, 6 or 7 out of the hundreds I've done that have been really transformative and mystical, you know, and they're grace when it happens. And sometimes there's windows where it's just more available, but other times it doesn't go there. But knowing that it exists has changed my life. You know, a theory I kind of want to bring up, there's this professor named Richard Doyle. He wrote this book, Darwin's Pharmacy, Sex, Plants, and Evolution of the Noosphere. And for his research, and he's a Pennsylvania State University professor, he read thousands of trip reports. And he said that the main psychedelic experience is that the participant realizes they're part of a vast interconnected living network, and they should be recalled ecodelics. You know, and because of this idea, I spent an entire chapter in the book talking about ecology and psychedelics. And one way it was like, well, why do 200 different species of fungi on every continent but Antarctica, and then thousands of different species of plants have psychedelics in them, including DMT? And why are they so big part of our ecological systems? One way they can be seen is that they're equilibrators. They try to create an ecological awareness. It's the way the environment tries to create homeostasis within the consciousness of those people. The same way your body as a living organism sends chemicals to other parts of the body to regulate itself, that the ecosystem's trying to do the same thing. From this perspective, they're part of a vast living evolutionary network. You know, as archaeological evidence shows, I mean, going back tens of thousands of years, if not hundreds or thousands, or I'll posit in my book, including with Terence work, millions of years, that they were a part of our culture. You know, and that's how we felt harmony, peace, growth. It's why we evolved. You know, that's why I wrote an entire book breaking down all the evidence, why and how this particularly cleared human evolution. right? And so if we're part of nature, we're part of this huge process, at least on the earth, going back almost 4 billion years. And we were following a trajectory until we begin to push these substances aside, likely during the agricultural revolution, we begin to grow our own food and not needing other substances outside of what we're growing and so on. Then we lost this rich array of diversity of chemicals like naturally grow in the environment. So from this evolutionary perspective, we would do a lot better. We would treat ourselves, the environment, other people, have spiritual experiences, feel more whole, and so on, by reintegrating into our diet these compounds that naturally grow everywhere that co-evolved with us over long periods of time.
So at what point, so you think it's like the agricultural revolution, do you think that's kind of like what ended up happening with like Western Europe and like kind of the advent of civilization? You start to see a lot of like mistreatment of the land and this conquest focus. Do you think that was because we started to separate from, any entheogen, really? We didn't have any sort of mystical relationship with any aspect of the earth. And I mean, look at where we're at.
Totally. I think historians, note that the agricultural revolution is the largest, most impactful thing that happened to humanity. And I would say it was a development, with the relationship with psilocybin mushrooms and so on. But nobody can argue that humanity looked one way until we figured out how to grow food, that we had huge population growth. Before the agricultural revolution, what's known as like a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, we're groups of 75 to 150 people roaming around. The value wasn't on material goods because we can really own whatever we can carry. Nobody owning land, right? So the value is on relationships. That's how we survive. We spend most of our day in connection and so on. Once we figured out how to grow food and settle on land, we begin to grow and own land, and then also acquire material goods. And this went on for generations and generations. Now you're inheriting material wealth and land and power. And it becomes really important to know who your offspring is. So men, just being larger body, begin to own women, to own them, to know who their children are going to be, right? So that we start marriage and so on. And our name is really important. And there's a lineage. And now with the beginning, you can see whether it's capitalism, economics, and so on, where now it's more about the growth of power and so on. But also, as Yuval Noah Harari points out in Sapiens, mushrooms are very elusive and couldn't have been integrated into the agricultural revolution. They grow through spores. They're microscopic. We figured out eventually that seeds from the plants and trees, but it was only because of Terence and Dennis McKenna in the late 70s, they published the first psilocybin mushroom grower's guide that we had the technology to grow psilocybin mushrooms. Wow. So it's very recently that we really even figured that part out. Mushrooms we couldn't grow. Whatever we didn't know how to cultivate, we just kind of left out. And we're talking about over thousands of years, we begin to build these structural societies, a military, priest, kinglyhood, and so on, instead of just a normal tribe society. We're very complex. And that began to take all our attention away from the landscape and nature and this deep interconnection that we have. So we lost this connection to these rich array of molecules. That being said, so that's about 10,000 years ago. But about 3000 BC, we have the first religious writings of the Rig Vedas, that started the Hindu tradition. And about 200 of those lines, they talk about soma, a plant or fungi that connects one with God. So we know at the beginning of religion, it plays some role. We know in the Eleusinian Mysteries in the Greeks, there's a great book recently came out by Brian Muraresku called The Immortal Key, became a bestseller, talking about the Greek tradition and psychedelics. We know for 1,000 years they had a mystical rites where they used a psychedelic substance, likely it was they used ergot that has LSD-like compounds inside of it. And for 1,000 years, they had mystical experiences, including Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, the people that created Western democracy and science and so on. So we know that happened for a long period of time. But as organized religion became stronger and stronger, wanted power, a lot of this was repressed. Everything seen outside of those organizational religions became a threat.
Yeah.
So once Western Europe came to the Americas, which are rich in psychedelics in the 1500s, you see the church writing, once the conquistadors came, of people taking psychedelics here in the Americas, and they are ordered to kill them all. Oh. The Mazatecs eventually survived. They were matriarchal. The women did the ceremonies, not men, and so on. They integrated Catholicism. There were remote areas. So a few cultures survived, but throughout history, when these things were found by this dominant culture that just thought it knew better and had to spread its own religious beliefs, it kind of just started to take out everything it came across without actually trying the substances themselves.
Wow. It's almost like a suicidal inclination to just kind of like it's so weird that an aspect of the planet would start fighting its own homeostatic urge. And that just kind of shows how disconnected we have truly gotten. And probably as a result of the way that our diet has shifted with the agricultural revolution and cutting out all these substances, we've really kind of given up our seat in the Garden of Eden, you know, where like that was the apple, was like agriculture. So I know you mentioned the Mazatec people and that you have actually trained with them. This is actually something that's really interesting because I've never heard of them in particular. How did you get connected with that? And they're still active?
Yeah, they are definitely. So they live in the Sierra Mountains in Oaxaca, Mexico. And it's because of that culture that we're aware of psilocybin mushrooms. Wow. So in 1955, vice president of JP Morgan, Gordon Wasson, he was really interested in mushrooms worldwide. And he'd travel around and learn about cultures of mushrooms. And he learned that there was a group in Mexico that had been using them in religious rites. You know, so he flew from the East Coast, eventually into Oaxaca, went into Cuautla de Jimenez, one of the cities of the Mazatecs, and then the curandera, the shaman, one of the shamans there, Maria Sabina, gave him psilocybin mushrooms in 1955, and he flew down with a photographer and so on. And he had some power and push and cultural connections, and he published his story in Life magazine in 1957. And that was the first time our larger culture became aware of psychedelics. You know, LSD had existed underground. There's some work done on peyote and so on, but those were mostly for like intellectuals and scientists, some artists and so on. Now we have all of America becoming aware. And then Timothy Leary learned about this, flew down to Mexico to try them. And there was this huge widespread and cultural revolution that happened. But it is because they kind of kept that light alive of psilocybin mushrooms within that culture. And they stretch back all the way to the Mayans. Wow. So we know at least a few thousand years ago, the Mayans had been using mushrooms. They have 180 carved stones of mushrooms, right? So it's been a part of that tradition for a long time. So it's because they kind of kept that light alive that we even have awareness of psilocybin mushrooms themselves.
Wow. That's amazing that you were able to plug into that very specific lineage and like thank Gaia that is still like, what a long torch, you know, like what a long history and how precious. And I hope that it's being protected and cherished and that just like my heart just kind of like throbs at the idea of capitalism sweeping in and doing what it does. So it was in 55 when this happened. And before that, it's just been kind of like gestating there, just staying. So like the rest of America didn't have any from the time we started until 55. The rest of the world didn't really know that this was still happening.
You know, yeah. So late 30s, and then he actually tried it in 40s. Albert Hoffman discovered and invented, depends how you want to look at it, LSD. Right. But that was kind of stayed in pharmaceutical and psychological circles and some artists. So that wasn't necessarily widespread whatsoever. And after this was discovered in 1955, Gordon Wasson brought out Albert Hoffman, who discovered LSD, to Mexico, and he isolated psilocybin and named it.
Wow.
So, you know, I mean, culturally, this was 1950s America was very religious, more conservative and so on. You know, we knew about cocaine, alcohol, cigarettes, so on. Psychedelics was kind of way outside of any kind of paradigm what we thought was possible. And so it had been going there. So North, Central, and South America, people migrated here about 20,000 years ago, and there's rich psychedelic cultures all across these two continents. And as Western Europe came with their own ideologies and beliefs, all that was really, really repressed. People necessarily wouldn't have had too much interest. You know, and it was mostly because he had this huge mystical experience, the way he wrote about it, people got really curious. That the interest developed in that area. And then you have the entire Timothy Leary bringing it to Harvard, creating 3 psilocybin experiments at Harvard soon after. You know, that really launched a lot of interest in this area.
I didn't realize that Hoffman was also the one to isolate it. Wow, he's got a hell of a career. So,
he did really good, yeah.
Is it safe to say that it was a lot of Timothy Leary's shenanigans that kind of got it criminalized as well? Because I know he had a huge hand with LSD becoming criminalized.
Yeah, he's definitely historically the people point to the most is this one human and it's his fault and so on. And it could be seen many ways. Michael Pollan, who wrote a recent bestseller on it, How to Change Your Mind on the History, and he did a great job researching the history of psychedelics and something he says always stands out to me. He says, what other point in human history did the youth have such a searing rite of passage that the prior generation didn't understand, right? So you're having the youth having these huge transpersonal psychedelic experiences, changing their mind. They're deconditioning agents, changing their entire belief systems. Noticeably, this really scares the entire parents. This is like, we don't know what's going on. Our kids are changing. The values are changing. People are opposing the war. They're doing drugs. There's all this religious stigma around it. You know, traditionally within these entheogenic societies, it's done in ceremony and lineages are passed down. The elders are there. The parents are there. They're passing wisdom. There's this unbroken chain. So here you're having the youth just go full blown out. The parents, you know, the older generation, made a sweeping gesture to make all psychedelics illegal. In 1966. And as Michael Pollan notes out, by that time, there were already 1,500 different research papers on psychedelics, all showing the promises of use, no addiction, how beneficial they can be. So the science was completely ignored. And so it could be argued it's because we didn't have any container, we didn't have any context, we didn't have any understanding, you know, and so it's been a really slow process to integrate these into our Western model, you know, through the last 20 years of rigorous science, so people can really understand that we can kind of interpret this framework and really hold it really well this time.
I love that. So do you think that that's kind of where we're at right now, as we're seeing kind of the fungal bodies kind of sprout through in terms of like legalization, you know, now that it's the idea is really permeating and like these papers are still there and more studies. Do you think that now we have more of a chance than we ever have to actually integrate this into our society? And are you confident that like this is something that will happen within our lifetimes?
I'm really confident it's happening, and it's happening very, very soon. Again, thank God for the empirical research of the science, because we now have data that's irrefutable. You know, we know how it's affecting the brain. We can see how amazing positive it is for people with illnesses that we didn't even know were treatable. We can see how much growth is happening all around. You know, I was here in Oakland, and I went to court to testify to make them decriminalized here, you know, where I live in. It was unanimous. You know, it's decriminalized now in Denver. It's legalized in Oregon. It hasn't completely gotten effect, but it's been happening there. Scott Wiener, the senator in California, is pushing for full decriminalization of all psychedelics across the state. Hopefully that happens next year. And so from a grassroots level, it's happening locally all over the place. You know, from a top-down federal level, 2023 is the projected legalization of both MDMA and psilocybin.
Wow.
So that's, that's on track. They're on phase 3 of FDA approvals. Everybody wants it to happen. There's no opposition. You know, these are very helpful. They've, you know, with MDMA, they focus on veterans. It's all bipartisan. Everybody wants this. There's a lot of pain, a lot of mental health issues going on. Everybody just wants it done correctly. They want all the T's crossed and the I's dotted. And so it's there. You know, and it's happening a lot faster, even from a grassroots level, than any of us previously thought was going to be possible.
I think something that's really fascinating about it, too, is as everybody right now, I feel like we're at like a climax with our political system, and that is just so broken and inept at this point. But we're starting to see with the spearhead of psychedelics and cannabis that grassroots campaigns on like single object things or single... I don't know why I'm not thinking of the word. Single issue things. Like these things are actually starting to like come through, and it's amazing that it's the plants that are showing us how to actually push real legislation through. And it's like, hopefully we can apply that same vigor once this thing kind of bursts open. Like, oh wait, we could have did that for like healthcare. Like what? Yeah. You know, I mean, we can see the plants research shows there's an increase. Well, I'll just stay with psilocybin right now. Increase in cognition, increase in empathy, ecological awareness all around. People tend to feel better and take care more of their family, the people around them, the community. They feel reinvigorated. You know, there's despair and hopelessness. A lot of people have this experience of dying and being reborn. They have a deep sense of purpose. A lot of people become activists, you know, so I'm not surprised that there's a lot of energy and push. You know, from my perspective, a lot of what happened in the 60s was because of psychedelics, you know, in terms of women's rights, a lot of stuff, you know, with racial rights and so on. There's this deep care, you know, whether we don't go fully into the mystical experiences, we can have this sense of oneness, that everybody matters, which kind of frees us from our isolation, you know, into a deep love and care for everybody around us. Yeah. it's kind of an amazing thing. You know, I have a lot of people in my life who are even older from like the prior generation who helped make it illegal, who are now like asking me questions about it. And, you know, I've been pretty vocal about it, especially when everything was happening. I had my own 60s era where I was like, this is the thing. Everybody needs to do this. And I had a lot of people who were like, oh man, yeah, you're off the deep end, like really concerned. But, you know, like 10 years later, they can kind of see like, oh wait, he's actually like really healed a lot of the things that he has going on. So now there's this doubling back. And I think that that's a really beautiful thing, that we're actually able with our generation to provide for the older generations what they weren't able to provide for us. And now it's like the evolution is working its way back through us, and we're kind of ambassadors in a way.
You know, I've held a few journeys for my father. You know, I can even tell you how life changing that's been. I'm imagining, you know, somebody that's 60 years old. He came in from Iran, and so my mom's from Mexico. And from that mindset, they thought, this is all I'm growing. You know, I've seen the world. There's this, you know, I figured it all out. And all of a sudden you give them this dissolving experience where they're able to heal a lot of lifetime of deep traumas, to see themselves more fully, to have more kind of, you know, same score, unitive experiences. You know, it's been an incredible gift to have that experience with my family. And a lot of the people that come to our retreats are average ages in the 50s, you know, 60s. So it's a lot of people that like, well, I've been in pain for decades or whatever amount of time. I'm ready to go outside the normal conventional bounds to see what else there is.
Yeah. It's amazing how a lot of that generation, they didn't have the same resources that we do. I mean, even like all the schooling that you went to, I mean, in their time, that wasn't a thing, you know, and like the culture really wasn't there. It was kind of like a fringy thing. So they have all this generational trauma, like so many people from that era, because it was the Wild West, you know, shit was just going down, and they don't even realize how much more free and open their lives can be. And it's what a blessing, what an actual genuine medicine to be able to go into that energy and to be able to open it up and like show like, this is what being a human actually is. You know, so much of it is just so condensed and calloused. And this is really one of the, in my eyes, like the salve to help heal that. Like truly, it's a passion.
You know, it definitely gives me, I mean, there's so much hope in my personal life, but also collectively for the world, like so much. It's so potent. I mean, I've seen lives just change overnight. Just for people that have been able to stop drinking every day for 5 years, stop overnight. You know, massive patterns. It doesn't happen every time, but almost half the time it does, which is a really high mark. And so how quickly, you know, humans can change and transform, and on a collective level, I think it just makes me really optimistic of the future. And I don't think I would have been like that if it wasn't for these medicines. You know, we could see, you know, we're moving towards ecological deterioration, economic collapse. There's so many things happening. And yet knowing that these are part of nature and they've always been, there will be, and they're gaining awareness, you know, it just gives great hope.
I almost feel like those two things are kind of co-arising. Like nature can, I mean, we are nature. There's no separation. And we all like, you can feel it in the air. There's this general buzz of like uncertainty and kind of like apprehension, like, oh, we're really screwing some things up. But at the same exact time, codependent is the awareness of psychedelics, you know? And I love that you pointed out like the level of optimism, because I'm also a very optimistic person. Like I'm very real in that like I can acknowledge what's happening, but because I've had these experiences of connectivity and like how honestly quickly things can heal. I mean, like you said, massive changes happen overnight. And I really do see like the psychedelic impulse as something that like we're not doomed, you know, but it's from that perspective of like, I know how quickly things can heal. You can orient yourself in a way to like do the work, you know.
Totally. Yeah, Jeremy Rifkin, he's a brilliant, mostly economist, but social theorist. He has a great book called The Empathic Civilization. And the whole premise of the book is he's noticing as entropy in our culture is increasing, so is empathy. So entropy being like, as we're going through all these deteriorations ecologically, financially, all these kind of heartaches are happening, and that graph is rising. Coinciding to that is a graph rising of empathy. And he goes through a history and see how much technology has increased sense of empathy, how laws have changed to include more rights and so on. Nobody can argue that our sense of care for each other is going up. And so is awareness, you know, of Ken Wilber, this integral theorist. He kind of writes that we move through this growth of first being egocentric, an ethnocentric, caring for the people that are like us, then world-centric, caring about the world, then cosmocentric. And he does this based on many, about 100 different models of human development. So we're increasing in awareness and empathy and sense of wholeness and larger identities, while the world in many ways could be moving towards a crisis.
Yeah.
And how much this is kind of correlated. It's like us moving towards crisis and eating up all the energy that's allowed us to have this technology to be able to communicate and have these conversations, right? They're really interlinked. And, Rifkin kind of just ends the book saying, we don't know which one's going to win. Will empathy or entropy win? And for me, I think empathy is absolutely going to win. Our cultivation and widening of our care.
Right. Well, I think the thing about empathy that a lot of people don't understand is that we all have it. There's, all that calloused kind of psyche that is there, but underneath that is typically a good heart for most people. And right now, all of the issues are front and center. People's pain is so out there now, and that naturally awakens that empathetic urge for the people who, even if you have like a sliver in the callus, like that's going to get in, and then that's going to crack you open if you allow it. But I think like the psychedelics will help you widen that crack, so you let more of the world in, and the natural spontaneous empathy will be there. But it does take like genuine change makers, people like yourself who are willing to do the work, get the education, and write the books, And I'm curious, what with this book is your ultimate aim? Like, what is, if the best case scenario happened, where would you like your book to play a role in?
Yeah, no, thank you. I've spent so much time thinking about that. I believe, from my perspective, this idea that we evolved because of the relationship with the psilocybin mushrooms is the big missing piece to our human story. I became obsessed with evolution during my teenage years, and I've studied almost 20 years in academia focusing on evolution. And I read Terence Mckenna's book, Food of the Gods, where he proposed this theory at age 19. And after all that time in academia, I still didn't come across a better theory. It fits in terms of like the neuroscience of why our brain grew. It fits from an ecological standpoint, from a chemical standpoint, from a religious of why you have religious experiences, even the development of language, even the development of art, tool making, everything fits and it grows in that area. It's all the pieces really come together. And I think our species is in this major amnesia because we don't know who we are. We don't know how we got here. We just see there's animals and then us and then plants. So like, we don't know what caused that link in that growth. And when we start to really look at psilocybin mushrooms in general, the fungi, the larger body of fungi is mycelium, this large underground network that interconnects all the root systems in the environment, passing information between all of life underground. For those that have not seen Fantastic Fungi right now, it's on Netflix, really recommended. And so of this large, vast, interconnected living network that we've always evolved on top of, grows this mushroom containing psilocybin, perfectly fits into our brain, creates hyper-connected brain states, these experiences of oneness. So we've co-evolved with this for a long period of time. And I think by changing our human identity of like, hey, that's how we got here, really legitimizes these mushrooms as safe as a part of our evolutionary process, and it will eventually lead us back to using them collectively. And by doing so, we reestablish ecological awareness, care, cognition, and can get back and track with our evolutionary process.
Wow. I love that, like, the missing piece of our past is actually the missing piece for how we create a more sustainable future as well. Like, they really, I can't think of anything else that would fit that hole in our gap of understanding. Like, what else? Aliens? Maybe. But that doesn't really help us for addressing climate change.
Yeah. It's something so alien. It's something so outside the normal paradigm, the dominant paradigm, which is, I think, why we've missed it. Yeah. That there was a consciousness expanding substance in the environment that expanded our consciousness, right? We've overlooked this tremendously, but it fits with our kind of regular view of evolution that diet's involved in our evolutionary process. But we didn't know until the late 90s that there was compounds that can stimulate neurogenesis, the growth of new neurons. We thought the brain's just kind of formed and it grows. We didn't know that there's compounds that can keep growing the brain.
Yeah.
So it really starts to bring all the pieces together. And just like when a personal human has trauma, it's kind of a part of their past they haven't integrated. Collectively, I'm kind of saying the same thing. We have amnesia. We have a huge collective trauma, not knowing our identity and how we got here and how we evolved. And by fixing that trauma, moving towards wholeness, we can really kind of establish a better society and way of life.
Wow, I love that. And it's interesting because I feel like our response to that trauma, a part of our hardening is religiosity. And that's actually the thing that has kept us from really returning back to the mushroom, because now we have this idea of who we are, which is sorry for those out there who subscribe to any potential thing, but like we have this conceptual model that has disconnected us from like the human body that is rooted on the earth. And then we use that as a means to hide away from that. I mean, it's kind of, it pokes a hole in the balloon of like the idea of, I mean, maybe like the soul or whatever. It's like, we are not that like special above the earth, you know, which is baked into all religions. We are of the earth, which is like, that's like a pagan idea, you know, like that's very threatening to a lot of belief systems, you know, it's powerful.
Yeah, as you mentioned, it is threatening. There's a lot of reasons I think this couldn't have come forward before. You know, if we were generally all one religious culture with its kind of all the safeguards to protect itself and its belief system, this would have been too threatening. You know, I mean, people were burned as witches just for being different or using plants. In the past, the idea of mushrooms, of connecting with source, wouldn't have been able to exist. And so now there's finally permeability in people's minds that even entertain this idea.
Yeah. Do you think that kind of like dark age was required for like a heightened understanding? Like it kind of took like stepping away from our unity to really see the full picture of our unity? Or do you think this was kind of an unnecessary sidetrack that actually hurt more than anything?
Yeah, you know, definitely. I like to subscribe through the idea of everything's meant to happen and it's all, you know, organized with a larger intelligence. You know, that being said, there's sometimes it feels like sometimes trauma has happened within individuals' lives that weren't needed. And there could be a lot of suppression of individuals and ideas. I mean, we have suppression of women for the last few thousand years, of other, you know, races, of just outliers of ideas, forever kind of dominant narrative. And that's information that's being repressed that can lead us to make better decisions in many ways. You know, with psychedelics, you know, if we never lost track, I feel like a high likelihood it would have been a much more harmonious, creative, interconnected world. Yeah. And given all the pain that's happened, you know, say all the wars, the ecological collapse, the suffering, all of it, the sense of alienation, anxiety, all of it, it's hard for me to say that it was all necessary. Yeah. You know, of course, I want to be like, yeah, it was, and find good things in it. But sometimes pain just happens and it's just awful. Not to say that we can't derive and integrate it and make good things out of it. But it would have been nicer if we were able to stay in that deep state of connection with us in nature. Yeah.
It probably would have made the game a lot more sustainable right off the bat and given the change makers a little bit less to work with. There wouldn't need to be change.
Yeah.
Well, Jahan, I know we are coming up on that time. Thank you so much for your time.
Dude,
this has been really wonderful.
So honored.
So
thank you. Thanks for that.
Let people know how can people stay in touch with you? You got a book coming out. That's an incredible feat. How can people stay in touch with your platform?
Yeah, my website's psychedelicevolution.org. And you can find me on there as services page to find my book and so on. The book's called The Psilocybin Connection. It's now on Amazon, the Barnes & Noble page, Google Play. It comes out April 5th, but all the pre-orders are already being taken.
Wonderful. Cool. If people want to meet up with you in Jamaica, is that a thing? Do you have anything coming up, or do they got to wait a bit?
I'm going in November again. There's another team going in January. AtmanRetreats.com, ATMAN retreats.com is the way. And then I lead that monthly group with the SF Psychedelic Society called Developing a Relationship with Sacred Mushrooms. It's a free monthly group.
Wonderful.
So people can join.
Cool. Man, there was so much that I still wanted to get into on like the intricacies of holding group space, and I had stuff, but yeah, time is a thing, and you know, I'm happy where we are. So again, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time. It's a pleasure.
Likewise. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
See you soon.
Me too.
All right, friends, that was the episode. Thank you so much for listening all the way through till the end. I really do make this show for you. That was Jahan Khamsehzadeh, and that was a doozy of a conversation, am I right? So yeah, thanks for listening all the way through till the end. If you want to support this show, head on over to Apple Podcast, leave us a 5-star review, follow us on Instagram, like us on Facebook, subscribe over on YouTube. Any interaction at this point really does help kind of rig the algorithm in our favor, if you will. We also do have a Patreon over at patreon.com/21st Century Vitalism. That's just for early supporters. The rewards will be coming probably next year in 2022. Wow, it's already 2022. Whew. And yeah, so today I just want to say thank you. If you want to stay in touch with Jahan's work, head on over to psychedelicevolution.org. All of his links are going to be down in the description as well. He's got his new book coming out. That's the Psilocybin Connection, Psychedelics, the Transformation of Consciousness, and the Evolution of the Planet, an Integral Approach. It's going to be on Amazon. It's being published by North Atlantic Books, and that's going to be in the spring of 2022. So, yeah, thank you again so much. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and I will see you in 2 weeks.